Another story that's heavily discussed online. It could be another 5 months before the election's called, but it seems that the campaign is already beginning. Both Labour and the Conservatives have been promoting their own ideas while talking down their rivals' plans to cut Britain's deficit. Labour claims the Tories have a £34 billion black hole in their spending plans. The Tories say that's a figure based on Labour lies.
And until they explain how they'll plug this £34 billion gap in their list of promises, they can't credibly say anything about what they would do on the deficit. You can't fight a campaign on a nod and a wink, sometimes claiming you're committed to these promises and when challenged, claiming you are not.
To claim that we are committed to abolishing the 50p tax rate immediately, that is not true. To claim we are committed to abolishing the changes on pensions at the top end, that is not true. To claim that we are committed to abolishing, that is not true. That took me 11 seconds, and that is £11 billion. This document is complete junk from start to finish.
Well, to discuss this, we're now joined by the Conservative blogger Iain and in our Westminster studio, web strategist and former Labour blogger Jag Singh. Thanks very much for joining us, gentlemen. I'll start with you, Iain, as you're sitting next to me. We could be 5 months away from the election, but do you feel like the campaign has already started?
Well, the Conservatives have started their campaign. They launched on Saturday. They've had shadow cabinet all over the country today, launching campaigns regionally. They've launched the draft NHS manifesto. So they want the electorate to see they've hit the ground running. And Alistair Darling's response, I think, was a bit tepid, really. This from a man who's criticising Tory spending plans, yet refuses to have his own comprehensive spending review to tell us what he would do. I'd actually like the parties, all three parties, to tell us what they're going to do in this campaign, rather than do what Alistair Darling did today and just slag the others off.
Well, Jag, I mean, do you think it's a bit earlier? Isn't there a risk that perhaps the public could get bored by all this talk of politics for another 5 months?
Quite the contrary. I cut my teeth in the American political process, and elections there last 18 months. And what we saw with Barack Obama's recent election, people actually were inspired. People got involved in the process, and I think it'd be a great chance for the political parties in Britain to show that they're relevant to the electorate if we had a longer election process. I think it'd be a great idea if it was longer.
Of course, both of you guys are political bloggers. It's your sort of meat and veg, really, this sort of stuff.
Well, I'd like there to be an election every year from that point of view. But the electorate, I just don't think are going to get turned on by this if it goes on for 5 months. If it's just this constant ding-dong between the parties, they're going to get totally switched off. What I think they want is a bit of vision, a bit of optimism from their political candidates. And at the moment, you've got David Cameron, who I think the electorate see as an optimistic politician. I'm not quite sure how many people think that about Mr Brown.
Jag, did you see any vision and optimism from what you've seen today?
No, I was actually sat with a number of Conservatives, hardcore Conservative-leaning supporters, when Cameron made his announcement this morning, and they weren't enthusiastic. They weren't enthused by it at all. There's absolutely nothing enthusiastic in the entire speech that Cameron made. It just mentioned change about 12 times, and that was it. It was just guff.
Iain, David Cameron has made health his key battleground today. How successful do you think the Conservatives are going to be in really convincing people that they're the party of the NHS?
Well, the NHS has always been a bit of an Achilles heel for the Conservatives, and Labour have always been quite successful at tainting the Tories as being an anti-NHS party. Now, David Cameron, right from the word go in his leadership, has made the NHS his #1 priority. He uses the NHS. People know all about his family circumstances, how his family have used the NHS. And today, I think, was partly about saying we are going to have to make cuts because we've got to deal with the deficit, but we're not going to cut the NHS. In fact, far from cutting it, we're going to direct resources into the poorest areas of the country, which Labour's actually failed to do.
Jag, do you think that the Labour message on the NHS has got across today? Is David Cameron sort of stealing a march a bit on the Labour Party, dictating what we're going to be talking about?
Well, the nice thing about the Tory NHS policies, we don't really need to listen to David Cameron. All we need to do is listen to Dan Hannan, and this weekend he was telling us that only insane people would want the NHS. It doesn't matter what David Cameron thinks. What's the rest of his party think? And that shows us, what the true Conservative vision for the NHS really is.
Now, of course, there is also a third party in this election, and of course many others in Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. The Liberal Democrat Voice have covered the Tory sum scandal, they're calling it today. They say the Lib Dem shadow chamber was waste time and point the huge gap in the arithmetic of the Conservatives' draft election manifesto. Vince was critical of both the Tories' sums and the principle of the inheritance tax cut.
This from a man who created the so-called mansion tax, which he immediately then had to withdraw and redo because he had got his sums wrong. So I don't think the Tories are going to take too many lessons from Vince Cable.
Are you worried that the Conservatives may be peaking too early?
I think that is a risk, actually, because if you release your draft manifesto so early, what the other parties are going to do is they're going to cherry pick all the things that they think are actually quite good ideas, and there are some that they will think that are good, and they will also have a lot of time to rail against those that they don't think are good ideas. So this is quite a risky move from David Cameron. It's never really been done before, but I think he's actually giving the public the chance to have some input. They put their health policy on their website today. They've got 5,000 people contributing ideas to it so far, far more than they ever thought they would get. So I think they're going to think that that's quite encouraging.
Iain, Jag Singh, I'm afraid we're out of time, but I'm sure we'll be speaking to you both many times before the eventual election. Thank you, gentlemen, both very much. Now it's time for the weather with Isabel.
As the hot spell extends across the Gulf,